In the last video, we looked at Anselm's account of God and the argument that he makes in the Proslogion for the existence of God, which is often called the ontological argument. In this video, what we're going to do is look at probably the most famous objection to the argument, and it's an objection that comes from another monk named Gaunilo, and we're going to call this the perfect island objection. So the way that the objection is going to work is it's going to take the basic argument frame or schema that Anselm uses, and it's going to show that by using that type of reasoning, you can show that a bunch of kind of weird things or things that it's silly to think exist. And the implication then is that, there's a serious flaw in Anselm's argument. So the example that Gaunilo, the monk, is going to use is that of a perfect island, right? So he thinks you can take Anselm's reasoning, and by his reasoning, you can show that perfect islands exist. And this seems to be silly, so the argument has a serious flaw somewhere. So let's start the objection in the same way that we started our discussion of Anselm's argument for God. In the same way that he started with a definition of God, we're going to start with Gaunilo's definition of a perfect island. So let's think of a perfect island as the following. A perfect island is an island than which a greater island cannot be thought. I'll abbreviate that as TTWI. So if we start with that definition and we use Anselm's reasoning in either the longer version or the simplified version, but I'm going to use the simplified version here for expedience's sake, then Gaunilo thinks we can derive the existence of a perfect island. And since that is silly, there's a problem with the argument. So here's how the objection goes. Premise 1, an island that exists in reality is greater than one that doesn't. Premise 2, thus, if the perfect island, or PI, does not exist in reality, then the perfect island is not that than which a greater island cannot be thought, or TTWI. But that is the definition of a perfect island. What is a perfect island? It's an island in which a greater cannot be thought. Thus, it has to be the case that a perfect island exists in reality, right? So, again, the idea here is to show that Anselm's argument obviously goes wrong, because you can take the basic argument schema or form of reasoning that Anselm uses. You can define a perfect island as that in which a greater island cannot be thought, and you could plug it into the rest of his reasoning and deduce the existence of a perfect island. So if the reasoning that he uses allows you to do that, then obviously something's gone wrong somewhere in the argument, because Gaunilo takes it to be silly to think that a perfect island exists. And again, you could, plug this in and run this same type of objection with other things besides a perfect island. We could define a perfect car as that in which a greater car cannot be thought. Then plug it into Anselm's reasoning and derive the existence of a perfect car, or a perfect tree, or a perfect whale, or a perfect anything, and derive its existence, right? So what do you think about Gaunilo's objection? In the least, I'd say it's pretty darn clever, isn't it? The question is, does it actually show a problem with the argument? Now, Anselm doesn't think that it does. And if you want to know what Anselm's response is to the objection, you can read that in the book that you have. Anselm's response to the perfect island objection, a letter that he wrote back to Gaunilo, is found towards the end of your book. But my point here is just to present to you the objection, talk a little bit about how it's supposed to work, and then I want you to think about the efficacy of the objection on your own. What I want you to think about is how Anselm might reply to Gaunilo, right? So try to get in the mind of Anselm. You've done the reading, you listened to the last video with the reconstructions of the argument, know a little bit about it. Try to get in his mind and think about how he would defend his argument against Gaunilo's perfect island objection. So in this video, we looked at Gaunilo's perfect island objection to the argument for God's existence that Anselm makes in the Proslogion. Again, it's often called the ontological argument. In the next video, we're going to turn to the second main topic of the Proslogion. Namely, we're going to begin our discussion of Anselm's account of the divine attributes. So we're going to list all the attributes that he ascribes to God in the Proslogion, and we're also going to look at the reasoning that forms the basis on which he makes those ascriptions. So I'll see you in the next video. Dr. K out.